Do biomechanics matter? Does movement matter? In this video, we're going to cover those topics. And I want to start by talking about a story of my wife and I deadlifting the other day. And with our deadlifts, we do 1 to 2 heavy compound lifts each time we do it, which means we're going to do 2 to 3 sets of somewhere in the 4 to 8 repetition range, really heavy weight, low repetition. And the next day after deadlifting, I was talking to her about how sore my hamstrings felt. And she was telling me how sore her low back felt. And you could take it one of two ways. You could say, well, she needs to strengthen her back for deadlifting. Or the way I took it was the deadlift is a powerful glute hamstring posterior chain exercise. So I wanted my hamstrings to be sore, and mine was that good type of soreness, whereas hers was sort of spinal facet soreness. And the take home of that is she was pushing the end range of her weight, we both were, but I was maintaining the tension in my glutes and hamstrings. She was taking that tension on in her spine. So when we talk about if biomechanics matter, I think about it as throwing darts at a dartboard, where the goal of this should be to aim for your best, most neutral mechanics, where you're maintaining the force where you want that to go. On a deadlift type movement, I want the strain to be in the posterior chain, lengthening through the glutes and the hamstrings to help drive that movement, to get the hip drive. Now, as she was getting into her heavy lifts, you could see her back was starting to go into that movement more. And that is okay, but that just says she's getting to the end range of her movements. So when we're talking about biomechanics and positioning, if this is neutral and here is end range of motion, I'm always striving for that most neutral position. As fatigue sets in, as let's say I'm distracted or I have less reaction time, then we're going to see us pushing our capacity to the end range of motion. And you see this at the professional level. You see this at the highest level of CrossFit athletes, where if they're doing it multiple sets of something, and their first ones, their form is clean, it's the most efficient way that they can move. And then as they get more and more tired, that's where we see form start to break down. We'll start to see more stress going through the spine. We'll start to see more valgus happening in the knees. But when we see those things, it's not that causes pain on that next repetition. It just says that we're losing efficiency of our movement system. Now, that's going to be slightly different person to person. But when we talk about neutral, like kind of the one's neutral position, that's where it's the most efficient mechanics for the body. So how can we move something from A to B with the least amount of energy possible? That creates least stress on the system. And the reason there's less stress on the system there is that when we're in our neutral joint position, the muscles are at their optimal length tension. Our sensory receptors, so our mechanoreceptors, our nociceptors, they're not getting stressed at their end range, because the mechanoreceptors, our tendon organs, those take on more input as we get stressed more towards our end ranges of motion. So the way that I like to train there is I'll always try to maintain sort of the best, quote, best mechanics I can. And then as fatigue sets in, or as the end range of my capacity sets in, we're naturally going to stress the end ranges of motion there. So when we stress the end range, there's less inherent stability built into our system, and because of that, we lose movement options. If I'm doing push-ups and I'm starting, for a push-up, you want to lock your shoulders kind of down into position, engaging the lats and engaging the posterior rotator cuff. That action of holding there and then moving keeps the shoulder joint settled. It allows your scapula to lock into place. Now, as I get fatigued, let's say I'm doing 40 push-ups, and towards the end of them, I'm starting to push and then rounding up through here, I'm losing stability because I'm losing strength and power. And as that happens, as a consequence of it, when I'm up here, I don't have as many movement options for my muscles. And so the chances that something's going to get put on extra stress or strain increases. So I'm trying to hold that position as long as I can, knowing that as I get to my end range, that's where I'm going to start kind of pushing up there and losing some of that built-in stability. So again, do biomechanics matter? Well, yes, we can cheat and we can work through a whole bunch of, we're very dynamic creatures, but the goal should be to strive for that most central point of mechanics, and then let fatigue and stress and exertion naturally push you to your end ranges. the more that you try to train in here, the stronger you're going to get to be in adapting to all different levels. So that's the importance of biomechanics. That's how I view and how I train people, all the way from acute pain to high levels of performance.